Welcome to the Behind Beliefs and Behaviors podcast, where we take you on a journey of what is behind the specific beliefs and behaviors that impact individuals and organizations. With our guests, we get to the root cause of what stands in the way of everything from health, wealth, and relationships to leadership, community transformation, and societal progress. From topics on leadership, psychological safety, corporate culture and communication, to parenting, trauma, relationships, personal health, and intimacy, this podcast is sure to get you to the source and provide you practical tips to transform your life one root cause at a time. I am your host, Dr. Maisha Claiborne. I'm a physician, a coach, a consultant, and an expert in trauma-informed communication. The founder of the Mind Remapping Company, I help individuals and organizations better understand the brain, behavior, and the root of false beliefs so that you can more effectively listen, communicate, connect, and create fulfilling relationships and results in your personal and professional life. Join us every Monday morning at 8 a.m. and let's get to the root cause and discover what's behind your beliefs and behaviors. I want to talk today about consciousness and the binary nature of the consciousness that drives oppression. This was not what I was planning on talking about today on today's episode of the podcast. But for those of you who know me, for those of you who follow me, for those of you who have listened to my podcast and who have listened to lives before, you know that for me, sometimes there's what I plan to talk about, and then there's what I actually talk about. So I have been thinking about this as I have been thinking about the state of where we are, the state of the world, what's happening, but not even just in the last few weeks. I mean, if we look at this topic of oppression and the work that I do in equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism, this is, beyond the acuteness of what we're experiencing, or what we're seeing, I should say, what we're seeing happening overseas in between Israel and Palestine. And so, it's been on my, I've been sort of, as I've been thinking about it and reflecting and trying to reconcile the irreconcilable, this has come to my mind to share, the space to share. And that is the binary nature of consciousness that drives oppression. So when I say, when I talk about consciousness, I want to make sure I'm distinguishing something, because there is some people may hear, especially those people who are listening to me audio only, conscience, and I'm speaking of consciousness. So when I'm talking about consciousness, I'm not talking about the conscious. I'm not talking about the inner feeling or voice viewed as acting as a guide to the righteousness of wrongness of one's behavior. That's conscience, right? So I'm not talking about the conscience. I'm talking about consciousness. All right. And when we look at consciousness, and I like to sometimes define things, because I think it's useful, especially in the work that I do, in teaching people the nuances and intricacies of communication and language, and how communication and language impacts our perception, our views, the way we experience the world. I think it's useful sometimes to bring in definitions, right? So if we're defining consciousness, there's the state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. We're talking about the immediate physical consciousness. There's the awareness or perception of something by a person, and the fact of awareness by the mind of itself and the world. So when I'm talking about consciousness, it is typically this state of being awake and aware, but also the awareness or perception of something or someone by a person. As I will say, as evolved as we have become technically as a society in innovation and technology, as a consciousness, we are certainly uh, limited in our evolution, and in fact, it occurs, or it appears to me, as devolving in consciousness. So, in the work that I do, talking about the brain, talking about how the brain works, talking about communication. If you have followed me, if you've heard a lot of the things that I've talked about, if you listen to my TED talk, I talk about this concept of perception and projection. Perception is projection. And if I'm to distinguish that, what it really breaks down to is that our perception of our relationships, of what we're seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, it's what drives our listening. It is what drives our behavior. It is what drives our communication. We, I think, as people in general, many people are sometimes unwilling to expand our perception, even when there's physical evidence that presents to us to the contrary of what our current perception is. And it's a lot of what we're seeing. And so, the binary consciousness that has been driving, that I believe is driving, as one of the drivers, one of the major drivers of oppression, is that we are currently living in this space of scarcity, this sort of consciousness of scarcity. And it is the historical made up belief that if you win, I must lose. If I win, you must lose. And this historically created belief um, created an entire system. So it is in this creating of this belief that over time, an entire system has been created, which we can see the fallout of that in the inequities that happen in healthcare, in the political party division, of this binary political party division, in this in race and racism, and this belief that the people of one a skin complexion or a color or skin color are better or worse than another, right? And so then whole systems and organizations and policies are being built on this binary consciousness that if I win, you lose. If I don't take from you, then I lose something. The thing about this consciousness is that there's a lot of work that a lot of people are doing, myself included, to dismantle these systems of oppression, to dismantle, to improve, the equity inside of healthcare, the equity inside of organizations, the inclusion and belonging, the accessibility. There's a lot of work that we as people are doing to dismantle systems of oppression, but politically and organizationally. But at the end of the day, nothing that we do, nothing that we change will actually make a difference until we start to evolve this consciousness, when we evolve beyond this binary consciousness that if I win, you lose. If you lose, if you win, I lose. If I'm right, you must be wrong. If we talk about the binary consciousness of conflict, if I'm right, you must be wrong. And I talked about this in my last episode of holding space for the contradictions and the complexity of trauma, that two things can be true. But when we hold the binary consciousness that if I win, you lose, or if I'm right, you must be wrong, or if you're right, I must be wrong, then it creates that conflict. And if we can't evolve beyond this, if we cannot, if people are not willing to re-examine their own perceptions beyond the binary, especially for those who historically who have been in positions of privilege and power, then we will never make meaningful change to break down these systems. And to be quite frank about it, do people who have this consciousness really have at stake to do that? This goes for, and as I speak about this, I know I'm speaking about it in a very abstract and big picture way, but if you think about this, this goes for organizations, this goes for the world, this goes for our nation, this goes for even as chunked down as families. If we are maintaining that in order for one to be right, another person must be wrong. If we are maintaining that, then we will never be able to see a solution outside of of conflict, and we'll never be able to see where there could be a shared value or a shared win. I think that's going to be one of the most important things that we do. And so that is one of the reasons why the people work, the individual development, the individual um, evolution of values, evolution of consciousness is important. And I want to talk a lot about that, in organizations, this whole idea of consciousness, this whole idea of emotions and feelings and inner work, inner game, that can be um, viewed as a slippery slope, or viewed as not as important as the very concrete shift and change of policies and procedures. But the people who are at the helm of delivering these policies and procedures, of creating these organizations, of leading communities, of leading countries and nations, these are the people that are occupying the binary nature of consciousness and are continuing to hold in place this consciousness. And then when you think about how this starts to bleed into collective consciousness, because if we think about this binary and how it drives behavior, what it does is put people on the defensive. And then you have a defensive and an offensive side. You see, there's another binary in that experience. We need to start to look beyond the binary and think and expand our thinking beyond the binary and look at how our behavior, because there's the thinking and the thinking that drives the behavior, but sometimes we need to look at the behavior and look at reverse engineer what is the source of the binary behavior? What is the source of where we are acting in a way that oppresses, suppresses in our spheres, in our organizations, in our communities, in our nations? And again, I speak this particularly to people who have historically been in positions of power and privilege, and not exclusive of people who occupy identities who historically have been marginalized, because if we know that two things can be true, we do know that a person can be oppressed and can be an oppressor, right? We know that a community, an identity, can be historically marginalized and can be also in a position to oppress others. We know that whole nations can be historically marginalized or have been oppressed, and can also then serve as an oppressor. And so again, looking at where the binary thinking of scarcity, the binary thinking of right and wrong, the binary thinking of win and lose is harming us, and how it takes the individual work of expanding that thinking, expanding consciousness. And really, that takes the work of examining our belief systems and where they are outdated. The belief systems are archaic, and where the belief systems are not even significant anymore, given the the critical nature or the critical place that we're in, where it doesn't make sense to believe old archaic beliefs anymore. And so, one of the things that it brings to mind, I always ask the question, like, how can we begin to really look at where we can act in symbiosis with one another? And it can't happen until this is something that can't happen and won't happen until we dismantle the binary thinking, the binary consciousness, individually and collectively. But again, it starts with one, it starts with two, it starts with 100, it starts with 1,000, a million, it starts with a community, it starts with an organization, it starts with a nation, that we are dismantling binary consciousness. And when we do that, it opens up the ability to see that we are in symbiosis with one another, or we could be. There's a type of mushroom, many mushrooms actually, that form partnerships with the roots of living trees, and the resulting fungus root, that this symbiosis is called mycorrhiza. And the mushroom's mycelium weaves itself around the root and alters the shape of the root of the trees. Then the mushroom absorbs water and the minerals for the tree, but in return, the tree gives the mushroom nutrients too. So it's a symbiosis. The tree doesn't have to lose by giving its nutrients to the mushroom, and the mushroom doesn't have to lose by absorbing the water for the tree. And so, where can you start to look at your binary consciousness, no matter who you are? Where is it creating scarcity behavior in your life, in your organization, in your leadership, in your relationships? Start to recognize where in this binary consciousness you're potentially suppressing or oppressing the voices and freedoms of others with this thinking. And then decide to change it. And when you decide to change it, then you begin to look at what structures do you need to put in place to continue to keep yourself accountable to stepping outside of this binary consciousness. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this in future episodes, and the impact of consciousness and communication. Because here's the thing, these are not common conversations, but if you don't think that the way we hold our consciousness impacts everything in our lives, our communication, our thought processes, our beliefs, and this idea of being awake and aware of our perceptions, like that's consciousness. And if we're stuck in this archaic and devolved consciousness, then how do we move beyond these eternal wars that are going on? I don't know the answer to that question, but what I do know is that is the work that I am committed to doing. That is the work that I'm committed to seeing in organizations and leaders and communities. Is this evolutions of consciousness. It does involve looking at the way we communicate verbally and non-verbally, looking at what we believe. It does involve all of that. So with that said, this is a time of reflection for all of us. And I invite you to join in that reflection, to begin to examine us as a community and share this episode. Because in order for us to shift binary consciousness, it can't just be one person. So share this episode with your colleague, with your family member. Share this episode with your leadership. And if you want to know a little bit more about how I teach this work in its various forms, from psychological safety, creating psychological safety, to trauma-informed communication, to full-on certifications in neurolinguistic programming, you can reach me at mindremappingacademy.com and schedule a call with me as a leader for consulting and speaking, or as a trainer. And so with that, I will leave you to reflect. And as always, I invite you to stay empowered. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We know that without the listeners, there is no podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe so you do not miss when we drop our next episode. And share this podcast with a friend, a family member, and a colleague, at least one person in your life today. This episode was brought to you by the Mind Remapping Company, helping organizations create psychologically and emotionally safe cultures that make their employees and leaders feel seen, heard, respected, welcome, and valued, all while fostering a thriving, engaged, and healthy workforce for the organization. Is your organization in need of a speaker? I speak about topics like psychological and emotional safety, trauma-informed communication, and employee well-being. If this is aligned with your organizational inclusion, belonging, or leadership goals, contact me, Dr. Maisha, by going to www.mindremappingacademy.com. That's mindremappingacademy.com. Finally, we train leaders, but we also train coaches. If you're interested in becoming a trauma-informed coach, visit our website as well and check out our NLP coach trainings and certifications. We'll see you on the next episode. Until then, stay empowered.